now my grandma's fully, and then now with the book and the tour and everything, my grandma's fully like
Mashallah.
supporting. Like the other day, I was at home, my grandma called me. And then she was like, yeah, I'm in Iceland. The girl here is wearing a hijab. She says she knows who you are because I told her my grandson was Muslim. He's Mustafa Briggs. She wants to talk to you. And then she gave me the phone and I was talking to a random person at Iceland. But like, if she sees Muslims and she starts talking to them, she's like, yeah, my grandson's Muslim. He does talk. His name's Mustafa Briggs. So she's
shows
proud of it.
how proud she
is. Yeah, she's proud of it. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Bismillah. So, Jazakumullah khair for coming, bro.
Alhamdulillah.
I appreciate you coming.
Alhamdulillah.
Quick one. So, to start off with, let's start off with your book, Beyond Bilal.
Yes.
The concept behind that, you know, because it's rarity nowadays, especially from the Muslim aspect, that learned people talk about that side of things. And I noticed that when I go on your page, you tend to talk more about that side of the Islam.
Yeah.
So what's the concept behind Beyond Bilal?
Beyond Bilal. So it's all in the name, really, Beyond Bilal. So essentially how it started was in 2017, I was doing my master's and I was invited. So it was my friend, actually. So I had a friend called Yusuf, who was the president of FOSIS, which is like Federation of Islamic Societies. Then I had another friend called Kyle, who was doing his master's, who had done his master's, and he was just somebody that, you know, he was known as a intellectual within the Black Muslim community. And King's College ISOC had organized an event, and it was about being Black and Muslim.
Okay.
Because what had happened was there was a girl called Najwa who had done a BBC interview, and in the BBC interview, she's East African. So the person that was interviewing her must have said something to her, like, she must have mentioned something about being Muslim, and then the interviewer was like but I thought you were Black. And she was like, yeah, I'm Black, but there's Black Muslims. Like, Islam is not just Asians and Arabs, as we all know.
Yeah.
And then that kind of, you know, Twitter, that kind of sparked the whole thing on Twitter, and so then all these different ISOCs were starting to do these Black Muslim events, being Black and Muslim, And then there was like a video series made about being Black and Muslim. Another like production company made another video series. So it became like 2017, 2018, it became like a hot topic, being Black and Muslim.
Yeah,
Black and
I
Muslim.
remember that actually, yeah.
Yeah. So during that time, King's College ISOC did an event, and they invited Yusuf to speak and they invited Cal to speak, and both of them were my friends. And they knew me because I had been traveling to Africa studying with African youth for years. I had done my dissertation at uni in my first degree on Arabic literature and literacy in West Africa. And then I was doing my master's translation at SOAS, Arabic to English, but I was focusing on West African Islamic texts. So they were saying I would be good to jump on the panel session to kind of contribute from a different perspective, like more from a historical side, because from the majority of the videos, it was more just Black Muslims speaking about their experiences being Black and Muslim.
Yeah, but no historical.
Yeah, but there's no historical analysis of Black history and of the crossover between Black history and Islam. There was no explanation as to how Black people became Muslim, how long Islam has been in our societies, in our communities, and our contributions to the development of Islam. And so my friends thought I would be a good person to contribute on that aspect of it. So they invited me to join the panel session. So when we did the panel session there, I just kind of threw together a presentation and I called it Beyond Bilal, Black History in Islam. Because I just feel like whenever we speak about Black people within Islam, it's always tokenized to Bilal.
Bilal is the main guy, yeah.
Bilal is the main guy or the only guy that people know. It's like when you talk about Black History Month, everyone just says Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, and nothing really beyond that. Within the Islamic societies or with Islamic circles or within like the Muslim community, it's become Bilal. And then Bilal's also used as a tool to silence Black Muslims when they speak up against prejudice, against racism. And oh no, there's no racism in Islam. Bilal was Black. Oh no, don't worry. Bilal was Black. But it never really goes beyond that. So I wanted to take it beyond that. That's why I called it Beyond Bilal. So that's how it started. So we did the first panel session. After that, Oxford University reached out. They said they wanted us to do that panel session there with them. So we did it there. Then once I had done King's Oxford, all these other ISOCs were like, yeah, can you come here? So I did like UCL. So 2017, between 2017 and 2018, I did like 5-6 events at different ISOCs. And then I took all of my presentations that I gave in the different places and put them all together as a PowerPoint.
Okay.
And I had a friend who's a graphic designer called Islam Yassin. He designs for like 5 Pillars and he's done like some stuff for FIFA and just different things. And so I said to him, look, I need like a real presentation because I'm a grandpa. When it comes to technology, I'm not that guy. I just did the dead PowerPoint presentation and I was clicking it in all these big universities. I was like, I need something that looks professional. So he threw together the presentation. He also does the artwork for all of my books, my posters and stuff. And then from there, like 2018 Black History Month, I had about 30 requests to do the presentation at different universities. So I ended up doing a tour of 20 universities, like every single day of the week. In October 2018, I was at a different university talking about Black history and Islam. And then from there, it hit Twitter, it hit Instagram. The Americans heard about it. And then their Black History Month is February. So, and I had just married an American like the week before.
American sister?
Yeah. I got married in LA. My wife's from LA. She's half African-American, half Mexican.
Okay.
And her family, she comes from like a family that they've been Muslim for like 4 generations.
Okay.
So I married into that family. And then, so the Americans kind of knew about me. And then when they saw the tour, February Black History Month 2019, that's when I did the USA Canada tour.
Okay.
And then it just kind of blew up from there. Yeah.
Okay. So when obviously you're doing this book and you're getting these PowerPoints, what feedback do you get from the people? Because obviously for people to keep calling you back, there must be some form of a benefit.
Yeah.
What was they getting from the conversation that you was giving them, or the dialogue that you was giving them, analysis you was giving them, that made them keep calling you back on other universities that they didn't know before?
I feel like it was just access to information that nobody had ever heard before. And it was information that's not mainstream information or popular information. But if you are lucky enough to like know Arabic and study and read through tafsir and read through books of tarikh, of history and stuff, all the information's there, but a lot of people don't have access to it. And then I feel like the community leaders that we have don't feel like it's important information, so they don't popularize it. So when I start speaking about, for example, prophets that have been described as Black, or prophets that if they lived in this day and age, they would be racialized as being Black, people like Adam, Musa, etc. People have never heard of that before. But if you read tafsir, it's there.
And even the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ talking about it.
Yeah, if you read that hadith, it's there. But because I feel like a lot of people don't feel like it's relevant information, they don't translate it into English and popularize it. So that's what I did. And then history as well. So when I spoke about, for example, the second chapter deals with Black Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ's different interactions with different Sahaba and Black Arab Sahaba, Black African Sahaba, out of the just Bilal, and mentioned about 20, 30 Sahaba. And these were Sahaba that were mentioned by Shuyukh previously, like Ibn al-Jawzi and Jalaluddin Suyuti in their books. But nobody had ever heard of that before. So that was new information. Chapter 3, I deal with the history of Islam in West Africa. So how West Africa became Muslim, the fact that Islam has existed there for over 1,000 years, the fact that there were Muslim kingdoms and empires there. Nobody had really heard of that outside of maybe a Mansa Musa reference. People don't really know about that history. So when they heard about it, then they wanted that information. And then chapter 4 was about the history of Islam in America before Malcolm X. The enslaved West Africans that were taken and their different life stories. Even reports of Muslims, Black Muslims arriving in the Americas before Columbus. That come from Columbus's crew themselves, and all of that information was information people didn't really know.
Even I think, wasn't it, he's the guy that was guiding him. His guide was actually, I don't know if he was Black, but I definitely know he was Muslim.
He was Muslim, yeah. One of them was Muslim. He was a Moor. So they were, Spain was ruled for nearly 800 years by North Africans. So he was one of those. And even that, by going to that more in the next book, but like the North Africans that ruled southern Spain, a lot of them were West African as well, because there was that trade relation between West Africa and North Africa.
Morocco, Mauritania, all that kind of...
Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal. So that's why you have in a lot of medieval depictions of the Moors, they're described as being Black. It's not because they were specific people that were Moors, but Moor was a term that they used for Muslims, be they Arab or Berber, Amazigh or West African, because there was a large diaspora of West Africans living in North Africa, and then from North Africa they went into Spain, etc.
So the question from some people within the Muslim community, and I'm sure you've had it, is what is the necessity to bring about their color? Because then we know Islam is not about color or whatever. The Prophet ﷺ talks about it, that the black is not better than the white is not better than the black. From your own mouth, without other people's views, what would be your answer to that? Like, why am I pushing the Bilal narrative or beyond Bilal narrative?
I feel like the reason why I focused on that and the reason why I thought that was important is because there's always theory and practice. In theory, there's no racism in Islam. In theory, color doesn't matter. In theory, being black or not being black is not important. But in practice, that's not the way Muslims behave. That's not the way Muslim societies and communities function. Colorism exists in all of our communities.
It happened at the time of the Prophet
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam up until today. And even the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the fact that in his final khutbah on Hajjatul Wada, he mentioned specifically that an Arab is no better than a non-Arab, and a non-Arab is no better than an Arab, and the black is not better than the white, and the white is not better than the black. It's because he realized that that was not only a problem in his time, but it will continue to be a problem. And wherever Islam has spread, wherever communities have existed, anti-blackness has existed and racism has existed until today. So in theory, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be something we should talk about. But in practice, it's a real issue. So if it's a real issue within our communities, within our societies, how do we go about fixing this issue?
So,
for me, sitting down complaining about my experiences being black wasn't enough. Or preaching to people, oh yeah, you should give black people respect, or da-da-da-da-da. It's not enough, because really, it's not going to remove the ignorance from people's hearts. But I thought that if we relook at Islamic narratives and we relook at our history and we relook at the Quran and we relook at the Sahaba and the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we realize the role that black people have played in this, not only will it allow non-black Muslims to realize black people's worth and black people's contribution to the development of the religion, and then maybe see them differently, because the viewpoint for a lot of people is, you know, the Arabs were the ones that brought Islam, Persians, Asians helped spread Islam, and Africans are just on the sideline, not really contributing, and then maybe they came and Islam was brought to them and it helped them in some way. And they don't really place Africans or black people in the mainstream narrative of the history of the spread of Islam, or even conceptualize that black people had kind of any influence in the spread of Islam, and that affects how they now see black people and treat black people. So when you're black, for example, and you walk into a masjid and people are trying to teach you how to do wudu because they assume you don't know, or they're trying to teach you, or they ask you, oh, are you Muslim, or can you recite Fatiha, etc. People who look
there's
visibly... There's an assumption made just because of your skin tone or just because of your color. And people who look Asian or people who look Arab, they don't receive that. Like I have a friend called Sheikh Abdullah Misra. He's a Hindu convert in Canada. And he's saying it's interesting for him because he is a Hindu convert, but nobody ever assumes he's not born Muslim because he's
Asian, Pakistani.
Exactly, because
like
he's from the subcontinent. It's like, whereas for me, I come from an area where there's been Islam for over 1,000 years. Even though I am a convert, maybe my cousins who are not converts, for example, like I've got cousins who are Muslim, who come from Muslim families that have been Muslim for hundreds of years. If we walk into a masjid, people might assume we're converts. So even that is a mentality. So I wanted to shift that mentality from that side. And then also just from a black Muslim perspective of empowering ourselves, because a lot of black Muslims even have internalized this and they don't even see themselves as contributors or as a part of Islamic history. They see themselves as guests, or they see themselves as new to the religion. To the point that I went to Mauritania for a conference. There was it's called the Islamic Cultural Association of Mauritania and West Africa. And they had a conference alongside the Muslim World League. So the president of the Muslim World League was there, and the president of the Mauritanian organization was there, and they invited ulama from over 100 countries. And I was invited along with the Imam of Regent's Park Mosque and a few others to give presentations at this conference. So when I was in Mauritania, it was interesting because somebody reached out to me. And Mauritania, people know that Mauritania mostly it's an Arab country, it's part of the Arab League, but the population is split between white Arabs, black Arabs, and then black Africans. So there's black Africans of the Soninke ethnic group, the Wolof ethnic group, the Fulani ethnic group, but they all live in Mauritania. But the most the politically and the economically powerful group are the white Arabs. So there was a lady and she was Soninke. And Soninke are like the first one of the first ethnic groups in West Africa to become Muslim. But they faced discrimination from the Arabs.
Of course. Until
today. And she was saying that a lot of her friends and her relatives had left Islam because as Africans, they were being discriminated against by Arabs. And then them being African, they thought to themselves, well, Islam is an Arab religion, it's not an African religion. So they, through being a product of the French education system, they kind of disassociated themselves with Islam. And when they studied history, they saw that the history presented was Arabs came, invaded, forced Islam, So a lot of them had left Islam. And she was saying that she was on the verge, and it was through reading my book that she actually was able to feel proud and happy being a Black African and being Muslim, because she was able to see the history and see the place of Black people within Islam in a completely different context. So for the people that criticize what I do, it's like, I can understand where the criticism comes from sometimes, but I've seen the benefit of what I've done and how it's helped thousands of people literally feel comfortable practicing the deen and have an understanding of who they are and what their role in the religion is. So, alhamdulillah, the work continues.
So just a quick one, Barakallah Fiqh, obviously, and explaining. I think we'll get back to that in a different way as we carry on, but just a quick background about yourself. So your name, where you're from, a little thing about that.
So my name is Mustafa Briggs.
Because you said you're a revert.
Yeah, I'm a revert.
Okay.
So my real, I don't know if I want to put my government name out there, but
I want to cut it out.
No, my name is Mustafa Briggs, and I'm from Northwest London, from Camden.
Okay.
I was born in Shepherd's Bush, but I moved to Camden when I was about 5, and I grew up in Camden. I lived there from the age of 5 to the age of 24.
Okay.
My father is Nigerian, from the Efik and the Igbo ethnic groups. So his dad is Efik, his mum is Igbo.
That's the actual tribe's name is Efik?
Yeah, Efik and Igbo. Yeah.
Okay. I know of Igbo, I know that's a large one.
Yeah, Igbo's a large one. Yeah. Efik is a smaller one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's from Akwa Ibom. And then my grandma's Igbo from Abia State. And then my mum is Gambian.
Okay.
She's Gambian and Sierra Leonean.
Okay.
With some Senegalese ancestry.
So Gambia is usually more obviously Muslim?
Yeah, Gambia is 90 or 95% Muslim. Sierra Leone, I think, is about 60% or 70%. But my family, they're from an ethnic group called the Creole. And the Creole are freed slaves from the Caribbean, from America, from Nova Scotia, who moved back to Africa after the slave trade ended. So in the 1800s, they moved back to West Africa. So the American slaves, they set up a colony for them, and it was called Liberia. So the country Liberia was a project for liberated Africans.
Okay.
So they had their freedom, they could return to Africa. Then Sierra Leone, which was a British colony, because the Americans and the British were separate by then, all the people that came from the British colonies, so like the Caribbean islands, etc., they went to Freetown in Sierra Leone. So Freetown, the Maroons were the first ones to go back, who were like runaway slaves.
Yeah.
And then you had the freed slaves after slave trade ended who wanted to return to Africa. They were taken to Freetown. And then Nova Scotians who fought for the British and whatever, and they were given their freedom, they were also given the opportunity to go back. So my family went back to Sierra Leone, and then from Sierra Leone, they went to Gambia. So Gambia, the first person from my family to settle in Gambia was my great-great-grandfather. His name was Thomas Roberts.
Okay.
So you can see the name even is.
Yeah, of course.
But he married a Senegalese woman called Georgia Jow. She came from like a royal family in Senegal, but she was a trader. She moved to Gambia to trade. They got married. They had 4 kids. One of them was William. William had a son who he named after his dad, Thomas. And that's my grandma's dad.
Okay, I'll show you.
So, yeah.
That's the history.
Yeah, so the family for like 7 generations, we've been in Gambia. And then my grandma's husband, my grandpa, was from Sierra Leone, but he's also from that same ethnic group. So because they had the same cultural, they spoke the same language, had the same culture, they met in the UK when they both came here to study. And they got married in the 50s, had my mum. And then my dad came here to study, got sent by his older brother to study, met my mom, had me, and then, yeah.
So in essence, you're like 2nd generation born here, really?
2nd generation, yeah, because my mom was born here. Yeah. She was born here, but she grew up in Gambia. Because my grandma had just come to study. So when she came, she studied, she got her qualifications, everything. She was working here for a bit, and then her parents came to visit her, and they saw her living conditions in London, they were like, no, come back to Gambia.
Gambia was much better living than here.
For them, Gambia was better. Because my family were part of like, I don't want to say they're part of the elite, but they were part of the elite.
Yeah. So they lived a upper class kind of lifestyle, really.
Because there's people who immigrate to countries to like work and find opportunities. My family had always just immigrated to get education and come back. So like my grandma, her uncle was the first doctor in Gambia, like black doctor in Gambia. My grandma's grandma, so this is like, she was born in the 1800s. She sent him to University of Manchester to study medicine. And he went, studied medicine, came back. So like I remember when the Queen died, my grandma sent me a picture of her uncle with the Queen. Like when she came to Gambia to look at the hospitals in Gambia, he was in charge of the hospital. So it was like that. So when my grandma's parents saw how she was living in UK in the 60s, like my grandma was telling me like, oh, I see signs, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish.
Get this.
She's working. So they came, they saw her, they were like, just come home. Because independence was happening.
Of course.
All of that. So, and my great grandpa was involved in the independence thing. So he knew what was going on behind the scenes. So he was telling my grandma, the new government, they're going to need qualified Gambians who have education to come and work for the new independent government. So he gave her like a job application. It was like, there's a role to be the secretary to the president. You should fill in this application and come home. And so my grandma was there. She had her 3 kids. She was working, whatever, in England. She filled out the application. She got the job. So she went home with my mom and my aunt, and they grew up in Gambia. And she was the secretary to the president. So she would travel with him. She would go different places and
live that kind of life.
Yeah. And so she worked for the president for like years. And she was like the first Gambian woman to drive a car. Like she's 90 now, so she was telling me she was like, yeah, I was the first woman to be driving in Banjul and da. She told me all these stories. And people tell me, when they know who my grandma is, when I meet them, like older people, they tell me about her. And then from there, she went to work for the UN, and then she retired the year I was born. So when I was born, she retired. So then she basically raised me. Yeah. Over here. So my mum finished high school and stuff. She came back to UK to finish high school, then she just stayed. And then my dad came over, and then she met my dad, and then she had me. And then my dad went back to Nigeria when I was a baby. So I never met my dad until I was like 20. Wow. Yeah, that's even another wild story. Yeah, I had like a mad life.
Well, it sounds like at the same time, it's a rich life.
Yeah.
The fact that you are able to even connect all the dots, that your grandmother's able to connect all the dots for you. A lot of people sitting at your place wouldn't really know further than their granddad or grandmother.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
Because my grandma was, so my mum was a single mum when I was born.
Of course, because you're 20 years.
My dad went back to Nigeria and So because my mum was a single mum, then my grandma was trying to help her out as much as possible. So my grandma would leave Gambia, come to UK, stay, help, So I would always have to share a room with her. So when I share a room with her now, she'll be telling me things, telling me stories. And then she always, because she sees how the UK is, especially for young black kids, she always made it like a matter of importance to teach me where I come from, so that I know that I'm better than the situation that I find myself in. And because of the kind of family she came from and the achievements that she had, it was different from the situation I was living in. So she always wanted
high aspirations.
She always wanted to put into my head, like, don't be trapped by your surroundings. Always try and be great and do great things because you come from great people. That was always like her emphasis. And
I think, funny enough, ironically enough, that's probably your Beyond Bilal kind of concept as well, which is that you're showing those who are maybe lost or those who are confused and feel insecure about themselves that you're beyond what you think you are, because it's further than just Bilal. There are other people who created this and created that and created that. And in that, maybe you may find yourself.
100%. And that's something that it's like, from the age of 15 to 19, I was also in foster care. So like life switches, like, so I was in foster care. So even like just me being in foster care. How many years? But then for 4 years, 5 years.
That's peak.
And that was 8? From 15 to 19. So like from before my GCSEs all the way until uni.
No
so
siblings,
like my whole, no siblings. I'm an only child. Yeah, I'm an only child. So like even just being in foster care and living in a hostel and all of that, and then
has an impact.
Living that lifestyle as well. But then the grounding that I had from my grandma, that kind of, and Islam obviously as well. I converted to Islam when I was 13. The combination of the two is what kind of saved me from a lot of things that people I grew up with were sucked into.
Okay, so let's get to that then. So you, at 13, became a Muslim.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm guessing your mum wasn't a Muslim then.
No.
Even though that Gambia is 95%, whatever.
Because we're Creole, so that's another thing. The Creoles, they're all Christian mostly.
Okay.
There's a minority of them that became Muslim, but the majority of them are Christian.
Cool.
Because when they were enslaved, they became Christian. They had European names, etc. So like all my family,
Christianity kind of path.
Yeah. So like all my family in Gambia, they're all like, we have surnames like Thomas, Davis, Roberts. We all have English names, wear suits, and they live that kind of life. So they hold on to their Christianity. So even when I became Muslim, it was kind of controversial within my family. But
so let's get to that. You're before 13 now. What kind of things are you reading, or who are you around for you to be thinking about Islam at that age?
To be honest, it was going to Gambia.
Oh, so you went to Gambia at that
age? I went to Gambia when I was 6, and I went again when I was 12. And each time when I went, I was looking around. So when I went when I was 6, you know, when you're 6, you're conscious and you're asking questions and you're looking around. So I'm looking around and it's like 5 times a day I hear the adhan. Go out on the street, I see people praying. Gambia, they love like shuyukh, so they have pictures of shuyukh on the cars, on the shops, on the everything. And then I'm looking around and I'm like, all my family and my relatives that I know in England that are Gambian are all Christian. We all go to church and But when I come to Gambia, I'm seeing everyone's Muslim. So in my head, I'm like, why is everyone in where I come from Muslim and we're not Muslim?
Of course. So
then that kind of teaches me history. And then my aunt and my mom's cousin, she had like a tour company. And so we went on this tour and we went to, it's called the Roots tour. So you know Roots? The story of Roots. Yeah. The guy is Gambian, Kunta Kinte.
Okay.
So there's a tour that you can take where you go to his village and you see where he was captured as a slave, where he was chained up, where he was shipped from and all of that. And you meet his relatives and all of that. So I went on that tour and then that's when I learned about like slavery. I learned about colonization. I learned about...
At that young age still?
Yeah, I was like 6. But it was just a history thing of like, like they actually came to our country, took us away, enslaved us, changed our names, made us forget.
Audacity.
And then that's what made me realize like, oh, so me being Creole, because even our language is like broken English. It sounds like everything I hear in Patois, I can understand because I speak Creole.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, even thinking about that, like, oh, what? So our language is slave English and our names are slave names. And the reason why we're Christian is because we were enslaved by Europeans. But then how did these guys end up Muslim? So then I started researching that and asking questions. And then I realized about how West Africa entered Islam through them converting, having interactions with North Africans who were coming to trade.
Let me just understand this. Are you doing this all at 6?
6, yeah. I was the only child, so it's like...
In the Guinness World Records.
Nah, do you know what? When you're 6, it's like... I don't know. I think because I was 6, but I grew up without any siblings. Okay. So I'm always talking to my mum and my grandma.
Okay.
And I read a lot. And I'm around adults all the time. So when I was 6, I'm just talking to adults. Even when I'm in Gambia, my grandma's taking me wherever she goes. So she's with all her old friends. I'm just in the corner listening to their conversation, asking questions. Do you know what I mean?
No, but it's a unique character, bro. Because the majority of 6-year-olds right now, they're on games and you understand? So at the same time, it was a different age. So we're talking about, what, 20 years ago now, something like that, right?
Yeah. So, I'm
so
old.
TV-wise, we used to have the big box those days.
Yeah.
Game-wise, it was probably a PS1 in those days.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? It wasn't something like you can just have a phone like this and be on your phone.
But do you know, even that, because obviously my mum, like growing up in England, my mum was disabled and she was on benefits and stuff. So it's like, I grew up 5 channels. I never had Sky. I never had
MTV.
Do you know what I mean? MTV. If I wanted console, my mum's like, no, it's too expensive. So I never had I've never owned a PlayStation. I've never owned an Xbox. I had Nintendo 64.
Okay.
One of my mum's cousins got it for me. I had Nintendo 64, and that's the only console I ever owned. And I had Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
One of my cousins had one. Then he got Game Boy Advance, so he gave me his Game Boy Color.
Okay.
But it was like I never even grew up in that environment where. And then my mum's not one of those people that was always like buying me stuff like Shoe Zone, Primark, Peacocks. Them days. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how I grew up. So it was like for me, the only kind of stimulation I had was books. Like, because the library is free.
Of course.
My mum would drop me in the librry. Weekends, she'll be like, yeah, you can go to that. She'll take me to the library and it's like, they have the kids section, I can read. So that's just kind of how I grew up. And because I didn't have siblings and I didn't have like friends that I would play games with and stuff, it was just go library, get 10 books that will last me for the week, come back the next week. It was just like that. So...
Cool. So you're reading at that age, 7, 8, 9, still reading, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So that just kind of changed my whole perspective on like, who am I? Where do I come? Because my grandma's always like pushing into me, where you come from, taking me to Gambia to show me where I come from. And then me being exposed to Islam there just kind of kept me looking at Islam as I was getting older. And then I went back again when I was 12. And that's when I really kind of was really, really focused. I had read about Islam a bit more. I had been exposed to Islam a bit more. And then I was just like, yeah, being Muslim makes more sense to me than being Christian. So when I'm older, I'm going to become Muslim.
Okay.
Was there anybody in that time, like a maybe relative older, or a friend or a neighbor that's Muslim telling you? Because still, like what you're saying, you're young, you don't have to make that decision at 6, 7, 8, 9.
No, there was loads. So what it is, when I was in Gambia even, my grandma has, obviously Gambia 95% Muslim, right? So my grandma has a lot of cousins, for example, Christian women that had married Muslim men and they converted to Islam. And I had like cousins who were Muslim because their mums were Christian, their dad was Muslim, then they grew up Muslim. And then my grandma's friends that she grew up with, her childhood friends, they were all Muslim. So if I had any questions about Islam, she'd be like, oh, go and talk to uncle this or go and talk to uncle that. Do you know what I mean? So I had like people around me, relatives, family, friends, etc., who I would go to and ask questions and who were kind of giving me support and low-key dawah, but not really dawah like that.
So they didn't see it as dawah, obviously.
Yeah, they just saw it as asking questions, answering questions, sorry. And then it was when I was about 12, 13, there was a sheikh that I met and he was the one that kind of applied pressure. His name was Sheikh Hassan Sise. He was the one that kind of was really pushing me to become Muslim. And so when his younger brother came to England, he said, go and see my younger brother and I want you to take Shahada. And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm not going to take Shahada now. I'm 13. Like, I'll wait till I'm 18 and I can do my own thing and I'll take Shahada. But then when I went to see his younger brother, I was talking to him and it just made sense. It just clicked at the time. And I was just like, yeah, I'll take Shahada now. And
so you took it in England?
Yeah, I took it in England, yeah.
Okay.
Mum, grandma supported?
Didn't tell anyone. So I was hiding for about 2 years. It was only when I stopped eating pork and all of that my mum clocked, he must be Muslim. So then she asked me one day, she was like, you Muslim now? I was like, yeah, I'm Muslim. She was like, so what do you have to do now? I was like, I have to pray and respect my parents. And if I get money, give zakat. And she was like, it's your life, do what you're doing. Mum didn't really, Mum's very like, she's like, yeah, do what you're doing, whatever. My grandma kind of took it a bit more personally, but it wasn't even like she had a problem with me being Muslim. It was more like, oh, what am I going to say at church when they know that you're all Muslim kind of thing.
Same face.
Yeah, because of the family she comes from, like they're known Creole family, so it's more of a thing of, oh, like he's Muslim now. It's going to be like the new gossip of the aunties at church. Yeah, but after a while, because my grandma knows, like my teachers in Senegal, they're a very famous family in that area. And even my grandma's next door neighbors, they were students of that family. So when she saw that those were the Muslims that I was involved with, she was more supportive. She was like, okay, I know these Muslims. Because, you know, the Islam that we know in West Africa is peaceful. There's no terrorism. There's no extremism. There's no violence. But when you come to England and you see, like, you know, all the propaganda and how they portray Islam, for me becoming Muslim in UK, I think that's what she was more scared of. Because she's thinking, maybe he'll become radicalized. Maybe he'll become whatever. Watching the news and seeing what they're saying about Muslims and how they portray Muslims in this country. And then me now saying I'm going to become Muslim, it's more worrying.
So that was post, obviously, I'm guessing 9/11 and all of that.
Yeah. Because 9/11 was 2001. Yeah, and then there was 7/7, which was 2005. And I took Shahada 2007.
Okay.
So for my grandma, it was like, oh no, what's he into? But then when she realized the people who I took Shahada with and the people who I was studying with and everything, she was like, oh yeah, I know these guys. They're cool. So she just let me continue and she supported me. And she even used to take me, like when I'm in Gambia, she goes every Christmas. So she would take me for Christmas. And then if I say, I want to go to Senegal to see my teacher, she'll take me and she knows them. They'll go and visit her. Do you know what I mean? So now now my grandma's fully, and then now with the book and the tour and everything, my grandma's fully like supporting. Like the other day, I was at home, my grandma called me. And then she was like, yeah, I'm in Iceland. The girl here is wearing a hijab. She says she knows who you are because I told her my grandson was Muslim. He's Mustafa Briggs. She wants to talk to you. And then she gave me the phone and I was talking to a random person at Iceland. But like, if she sees Muslims and she starts talking to them, she's like, yeah, my grandson's Muslim. He does talk. His name's Mustafa Briggs. So she's
shows
proud of it.
how proud she
is. Yeah, she's proud of it. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So cool, 13, you've become Muslim. How is that with regards to your outer life? And obviously, yes, your mum found out you're Muslim after 2 years or whatever. You said you started obviously stopping eating certain things.
Yeah.
How else did it impact you?
I think it just gave me guidance. So it impacted me in two ways. Me personally, being Muslim saved me from a lot of things just because in my head I'm thinking, I'm Muslim, I shouldn't do this. Even when I was doing stuff I shouldn't be doing, in the back of my mind I'm like, I'm Muslim, I shouldn't be doing this. So the extremes that a lot of my friends went to in certain things, I didn't really go 100% to that level because in my head I'm thinking, nah, I'm Muslim, I should be better, I should do better. And then also on the flip side, that time it was, maybe it still is now, but that time specifically, it was cool to be Muslim.
It was, yeah.
It was cool to take Shahada. Those days, like, my favorite rappers those days was Young Spray, DVS, and all those. Do you know what I mean? They're all Muslim. So it's like, so for me, even taking Shahada and going to school, and I'm like, yeah, I'm Muslim, and I go mosque. The Muslims always rate it because they're like, oh yeah, you're one of us now. And then even the non-Muslims, they're like, oh, like he's brave, like he took Shahada, and it's cool to be Muslim. So it didn't even impact me negatively; it impacted me positively, like throughout my whole teenage years, just being Muslim. But then. Yeah, it didn't. It just gave me more guidance. It just helped me out. It just put me on the right path. Or it gave me a conscience, rather.
Cool. So head towards now you said you went to from the age of 15
to 19.
To 19.
Yeah.
How did that end? How did that happen?
Yeah. So it was just, my mum was going through some issues, mental health issues, etc. And then
she was disabled as well.
Yeah. And then I was also just getting involved in stuff I shouldn't even have been getting involved in. And then everything just kind of came together and I just got put into foster care. And so I was there. I had to stay at some of the time I was in a hostel, some of the time I was in foster family. And then when you hit around 17, they start to prepare you for independent living. So I had to go to like an assessment center where you live, and then they'd see your like living skills, cooking skills, whatever. They put you on the list for council flat, and they kind of speed your way through into trying to go to
live by yourself and independence.
Yeah. So that was interesting because it was, I don't even think I've even spoken about it publicly before. And I think maybe because I do a lot of interviews on podcasts in America, so it's like even the context of foster care and being in foster care in UK and stuff, different. It's different. But yeah.
How was that for you then? Because obviously I'm guessing you're separated with your mum.
Yeah.
Grandma
was like, she lives in she was here, but like she'll come and go and whatever. She provided as much support as she could, but it's like I couldn't live with her and I couldn't go. So I'd visit her like every week, every Sunday. She'll cook dinner or whatever. When she come back from church, I'll visit her, spend the day with her every Sunday. So that was like an important part of it.
But no involvement from dad.
Nah. My dad was just on his own thing. He was in Nigeria.
20, you said.
Yeah, I met him when I went to Nigeria by myself when I was 20. That's when I met my dad physically for the first time.
But let's stick to that kind of narrative. So experience wise, because obviously when we hear of foster, we don't necessarily think of positive things.
Yeah.
So was it similar experience? It wasn't positive.
It wasn't. Parts of it wasn't. So it was like when I was with a foster family, it was good. It wasn't good as in like it wasn't amazing, but I was in a safe environment. Obviously it's a home where maybe there's 3 rooms and all different kind of kids are coming in. So some of the kids are cool. Sometimes you get a good couple months where it's like you're with cool kids that are not going to cause any trouble. Other times you're with mad kids that are just on madness, and then they try to test you in the house and you have passer in the house.
You've been like in prison.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's according to the situation. And then the hostel is even different, like, because the hostel is like people are coming and going all the time. And even you're just left to your own devices. So imagine like you're 17, 18. They have a curfew, but you can bump curfew and stay out all night and come back whenever you want and whatever. So you become like, that's why I grew up very quickly and I became independent very quickly. And I developed like certain principles and certain philosophies and certain ways of dealing with life very quickly being in that situation. Because it's like, it's traumatizing, bro. Like I remember my first night being away from home and just realizing, just deep in my life, I'm like, yo, like my dad's not around. I'm not with my mom. My family, as much as they love me, as much as they're close to me, I'm here by myself. And that just kind of put me in a mindset where like, yo, I only have Allah in this situation. Like luckily I had the deen. So I was just sitting down thinking like my first night, I was like, yo, like I literally only have Allah. And I have to just build on that foundation. And that's how I've been ever since I was 15 then and now. That's how I've always lived my life. I'm just like, because anything can be, for me, I just feel like once I got put in that situation, it made me feel like anything can be taken away from me at any time. And no matter how much you love someone, no matter how much you depend on someone, no matter how much you have a relationship with someone, when push comes to shove, you might be put in a situation where they're not there to help you. Because I had relatives, I had friends, but when I'm being taken into foster care, none of them were there to say, we don't want him taken there or we'll take him. Do you know what I mean? As much as you have an auntie or an uncle or this or that you think, oh yeah, they love me and they'll support me. When push comes to shove, I'm in foster care. You know what I mean?
Coming forward. And sometimes, obviously, to be balanced for other people, it might not be maybe their choice as well. Maybe they couldn't financially or
no, that's what I'm saying. I don't blame anyone for it, and I don't have bad feelings towards anyone for it. Because it's situations. And I feel like even I'm happy that I was even put in that situation because the way my life has turned out and the person that I am now, all of my difficult situations is what made me who I am. It's not my positive situations. As much as, because me and my cousins maybe all have the same life story or we all have the same relatives, or we all have the same access to my grandma, but it's like situations that I was in made me rely on certain resources more or history more or this or that more. And the person I've ended up becoming, alhamdulillah, I'm happy with the person I am. Obviously, there's room for improvement.
Of course.
And I try and do my best to be a better person every day, every week, every year, every month. But in terms of who I could have been and who I am, I'm very happy with who I am. And I know that it's these situations that made me like that. Me growing up without my dad, me growing up with my mum the way she was, me being put in foster care, all of these things contributed to me being the person I am. Me growing up in poverty, me growing up not having access to certain luxuries or certain things, that all kind of pushed my drive. It all kind of pushed the way I am now. Like I remember when I was in secondary school, because I wanted money and I didn't have money, I was an entrepreneur from early. I was taking stuff to school, selling it. I was getting caught in the playground. I was making like £200, £300 a week at school.
Just by selling
food and snacks and cookies and just doing stuff in school. Do you know what I mean? And that has even helped me now with when I graduated. Like I looked at my life and how I wanted to live it and certain principles I have, and I'm just like, it's things that I learned through these situations that make me the way I am now. So
the crazy thing with difficulties and things like this, because I try to talk a lot about that, is that it's contrary to how we live in the West today. Today, you go to a play area for kids, everything is all soft cushion. Make sure that the corners have got a little spongy bit there, just in case the kid hits the corner. Like you've made the child grow up in such a way you don't want them to have any harm. They scratch themselves, you make sure you put a little plaster on there. So the lifestyle we've built for youngsters today is not even to be hurt. But the stories that we hear from you, and even many brothers, mashallah, some behind the scenes here, that those difficulties allowed you to become a more resilient, confident, whatever. Do you know what I'm trying to say to you? So it's contrary to what we're being told today to raise our kids like.
Yeah, definitely. And even just if you look at Islam, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the time that he's given the biggest openings are always after his most difficult trials and tribulations. And even him, he said the people who are tested the most and the most beloved to Allah are the prophets, and then the people who follow them. So if you look at the stories of all the prophets in the Quran, they all go through difficult situations. But if they never went through those difficult situations, Allah wouldn't bring the blessings that they have for them. So Ibrahim going through the difficulty of being sentenced to death by his society wouldn't have given him that opportunity to leave and say, I'm going to Allah, and then become the ancestor of the ummah that we know today. If we look at Musa alayhi salam, him not going through the difficulty of manslaughter, killing that person and being chased, and the Fir'aun is looking for him, etc., to the fact that he has to go and seek refuge in the desert, that's where he meets Allah, that's where he's given his mission. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if we think about the deen and how the deen came to him and how he started to give da'wah, all of the trial and tribulation that he faced and all of the opposition that he faced and the oppression that him and the Sahaba went through is what led to him being given Medinatul Munawwara. Because if things were easy in Mecca, he would have just sat in Mecca. We wouldn't have Medina.
Exactly.
But the fact that he went through that difficult situation, Allah opened up Medina for him. And even the salah that we pray 5 times a day, it's the year in which the Prophet ﷺ lost his wife and he lost Abu Talib, Am al-Huzn, the year of depression. That is the worst year, essentially, of the Prophet ﷺ's life. And the Taif, they had stoned him and he'd gone through all of that. He reaches what we could say would be one of his lowest points. That's when Allah then raises him to himself, gives him Isra al-Mi'raj, makes him lead all of the other prophets in prayer in Jerusalem, takes him through the 7 heavens, shows him paradise, shows him hellfire, shows him what's to come for his ummah, and then gives him salah to give to us. So that blessing there came after the difficulty. And Allah always tells us, even in the Quran, إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, after every difficulty or with every difficulty, there's ease. And if you look at al-usr, it's singular. It has an alif lam. But if you look at yusra, it doesn't have an alif lam. So it's more abundant than
there's no stopping it.
There's no stopping it. It's not. It's nakira. It's not ma'rifah. So with that, even is an indication and it's a ishara from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that one difficulty opens up the doors for multiple goodness. And even the fact that he said it twice, some of the scholars say it's one difficulty, but there's 2 eases with every difficulty or more. So that one difficulty of absent father, one difficulty of foster care, one difficulty of mental health in the family, one difficulty of all these difficulties, they've opened up doors for blessings that, alhamdulillah, just having sabr in times of difficulty, it opens up times where Allah will give you blessings that you can have shukr for. So alhamdulillah, it's not an issue, alhamdulillah.
No, mashallah, man. And then moving from that, obviously, mashallah, as you're speaking now, you're a person who's studied, learned, and inshallah, Allah increase your moral.
Inshallah.
How did that path come now, seeking knowledge?
So when I was about 14, I'd taken Shahada, I'd been Muslim for like a year. I said I wanted to learn how to read the Quran. So the sheikh that I took Shahada with, he had a niece who lived in Manor House those days, and she was a Quran teacher. Because their whole family, mashallah, they're a family of Quran. Like for 7 generations, men and women, they all memorize Quran. So this, my teacher, she memorized Quran, she was like 13, 14. And when she came to England, she said, I want to teach Quran because that's what I know. That's what my family's been doing. That's what I want to do. So she came to England with her husband and they opened a Quran school. It was literally in their living room. So I was 14, I used to go study with her. I would, that's where I learned Alif Bata, learned how to read and started memorizing Quran.
So you went seeking this out?
Yeah. Because I realized, I was like, if I'm going to be Muslim, I want to take it seriously. And I want to understand what this is that I've come into. And being around, like, my teachers were a big part of that, because it's like being around these West African shuyukh, you see they take Quran so seriously. They take knowledge so seriously. They're always quoting poems and quoting hadith and quoting all these things. And it's like, for me, I just felt, when you're in an environment and you're like, oh no, like everyone knows Quran, everyone knows this thing. I need to step up my game and learn. So I just said, I want to learn. So I went to her and I studied with her for like 2-3 years, up until like I was doing my GCSEs. And then that's when I kind of took a break. But every weekend I'll be in her house studying Quran. Even it'll be like in the morning. So even if I wanted to be active at night or be outside, at least in the morning I know I've got Quran class, I'll go study Quran. And then when I was about 16, I signed up for a course to learn Arabic, because it's like I can read and write Arabic now. I've memorized surahs, I've memorized certain juz and everything. Now it's like, okay, but the barrier that I always see, and especially with Islam in West Africa is that a lot of the books that they study or teach there are not translated into English.
No.
So you don't have access until you learn Arabic. It's either that or you're waiting for someone to translate it.
Sure.
And yeah, depending on people wasn't my thing. So I was like, yeah, let me go and learn Arabic. So there was a centre in central London. I'm from Camden. This was in King's Cross. It was called Ibn Jabal at the time. Now they changed the name. It's called Arabica Institute. But I signed up to that, and they used to teach classes like once a week, and it was like £200, £300. So but they had a scholarship, so I just signed up for the scholarship. They gave it to me. So when I was like 16, 17, I started doing that. I did that for a year, 2 years, and then when it was time to go to uni, I wanted to study Islamic studies. So from like when I was 18, I was like, I just want to go University of Medina or go to Azhar or go somewhere. I remember when I was younger, there was one video Ismail Beaumont did when he was at University of Medina and they did the tour and everything. I was like, I want to be like these, man. They even have a basketball court. They go gym, they study. I was like, I want to do that. But my family were like, you need to get a degree and you should get a degree. And then even me just thinking about security, and I got scared. You know, they do that scare tactic of, oh, you need a job, and
older,
9 to 5 and go to uni and whatever. And I didn't want to be a sheikh or an imam or anything. It was just Islamic studies. I just liked it for my own personal development, but I didn't want to do anything with it. So I was just like, okay, let me go to uni. So I applied for uni, but I wanted to do something where I would still be able to study Arabic and Deen, but at the same time get a degree. So Westminster University had a degree course, International Relations and Arabic. And with international, what I originally wanted to do was economics and Arabic at SOAS.
Yeah.
But then I was in foster care. I failed my A-levels first time round. So I missed that opportunity. So then when I had to retake my A-levels, I was like, I applied for Westminster and I got in. So when I applied, got in, I used to take summers now. I would hustle and then go and study. So I'll go to Senegal, study. Go to Mauritania, study. Because a lot of the scholars in Mauritania would come to Senegal, etc. So I knew a few. So from 17, I started going to Mauritania every year, study.
Okay.
Senegal, study in the summers, in the holidays. And then I was doing uni at the same time, and I was doing Arabic and international relations. And I wanted to go into like either diplomacy or, because my grandma was a diplomat. So I was like, okay. And then my uncles, like all my mom's cousins and stuff, they all like worked for the UN or they did diplomacy or they were ambassadors or whatever for different places. So I was like, okay, maybe that's something I would want to do. And then if I have the language skills with that, I could do that together.
Of course.
So studied at Westminster. I did 4 years there. Then when I finished, I was like, I'm not ready to go into the workspace yet. I still want to learn. I still want to study. So then I applied for a master's, and I still wanted to go to SOAS, even though I got turfed the first time.
Come back to conquer.
I come back to conquer. So I applied for master's at SOAS, and then I got in, and I was doing my master's there. And then
in Arabic,
in Arabic, translation, and with a specialization in Islamic texts. So that was like a 6-year period, really, from sixth form to when I finished my master's, where every summer I'd be in Africa studying, and then I'll come back and just be doing term time here. And then when I finished with my master's, I was like, I balanced everything and I was applying for jobs and whatever. And then I had already started the public speaking thing as well, like with Beyond Bilal and everything. And I was just like, I looked at myself personally, and I was like, okay, what would I be happier doing? I want to study the deen. Like, that's what I really want to do. If I work, I'm just working to say I have a job and to stunt on my family and be like, yeah, I'm this or I'm that, or I'm at World Bank or I'm at UN or whatever. But in my heart, what I really wanted to do was study. And I didn't want to get to a level where like I'm 30 or I'm 40. Because you meet so many people who like they're 30, 40, 50 and they're like, yeah, I wish when I was younger I had done this, or I wish I had whatever. And my Arabic wasn't where I wanted it to be. My Islamic studies weren't where I wanted it to be. And I had a cousin that was in Egypt trying to study at Al-Azhar at the time. So I had visited him in Egypt. I saw the lifestyle. I saw it was manageable, and even 200, 300 pounds a month, you can hustle, make it happen. I was like, yeah, let me at least go Egypt for maybe a year, 2 years, try and see what I can do, whatever. So when I finished my master's, that's when I had a friend that was out there as well who was studying. So between the two of them, I just was like, yeah, hook me up an apartment, help me out. They got me an apartment, set everything up. And then I made the decision that I wanted to move to Egypt and just continue my Islamic studies. So that was 2018.
Okay. So not too long ago, really.
Yeah, yes. Well, 5 years ago.
Time flies.
Up until that point, I had done a lot just in Africa, in West Africa.
Yeah, well, I was going to point out even the fact that at 17, 18, 19, 20, you're traveling. Like a lot of again, I have to, because a lot of youngsters that are watching this, they don't do that, akhi. They still need mummy's hand to take them there. So
and I was doing madness to study because obviously I didn't have no one to support my studies. So it was a thing where I would do stuff like Morocco. You could get the £20 tickets right in there to go Morocco. So I'd go to Fez with like £100, and they sell these, you know, the jalabiyas with the hoods. They sell them in packets of 10 for £60. So if I go there with £120 and I can get 20 jalabiyas, then I'll put on Facebook, I'm selling these jalabiyas.
Okay,
£40, £50, you're buying them for £6, you're selling them for £30, £40. I hustle, then from there now I can get the flight to Senegal. I was doing stuff like that. So I just made it happen. Like, of course. Yeah, and obviously I had that experience from school and from being in the ends. And
Did you mention you done another degree, or was it another master? Did you do 2 degrees or?
No, so I'm doing another bachelor's now in Azhar. I'm doing bachelor's again, but this time in Arabic.
Okay, mashallah. That's like a Sharia kind of like a degree.
Islamic studies. Usul-ud-Din.
That's what you studied in Egypt.
Yeah, that's what I'm studying in Egypt. So
now, you're still in Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just here on vacation.
How many years left in that one?
I've just a couple years left, but I like Egypt, so I don't even know if I'm gonna move anytime soon. Even when I finish, I might just chill there.
So that is that in Azhar or is that?
I'm at Azhar. I'm at Azhar. I'm at Azhar.
Okay, we might have to talk about that. I've got my kids and we're over there ourselves. So
you're in Egypt?
Yeah. We're over there as well at the moment. So we'll chat, inshallah. But khair, you're
just a few points I wanted to ask. So, you know, the book Beyond Bilal and from a community perspective. So let's say for, you know, us here in Lewisham as an example, in terms of we're trying to kind of like keep everybody together. Do you think maybe the book, it gives a sense of knowledge, but let's say to maybe other community members, it can create insecurities or maybe lead to division?
No, I don't think so. The way I've written the book and the way I set everything out, it's not in a way that I feel causes tension or division. Because I've done it in a way where it's just about history and education, and it's shared Islamic history. It's just a different aspect of Islamic history. But in terms of what the book speaks about and what the book represents, honestly, from personal experience, I've seen that the only people that really seem to have an issue with it might be older people, but young people, they all love it. Like, I've never had a complaint about my book or about my presentation from a young person, like someone under 30, someone even under 40. They've never really had tension with it. And even America, like, I tour in America more than the UK. And I feel like I'm more known in America than I am in the UK. But in America, most of the people that book me, if I tell you, I go every year, I tour every year, and each tour I'll do about 20 to 30 events. I would say 80 to 90% of the people that book me are not black. It's mostly subcontinent, Asians, Arabs, MSAs, like Islamic societies, etc., who they just want to know and understand more about black history in Islam. And they want to, maybe if they're community leaders or if they are people of influence within their communities, they want to have access to this information so they're able to better interact with the black Muslims in their spaces, in their congregations or in their organizations. But black people booking me is not even as big of a thing as you would think it is. It's more people from outside of the black community who want to know and who want to understand. So I would say, if you're trying to do that in Lewisham, especially in this community where I would say a lot of the congregation are black, I would say it is a good resource to use, and it is a good thing to have mutual understanding. Because Allah tells us in the Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَرَّفُوا, that He made us into different tribes and nations, so we should know each other. And even if you look at that word ta'arrafu, it's not knowledge that's based on reading and studying. It's knowledge that's based on interacting. Ta'aruf is like interaction. So Allah makes us different in order for us to interact with each other and appreciate each other and know each other.
So would your angle be that, like I said in the beginning, really, in essence, that because the black Muslims, and even other blacks to be fair, but specifically black Muslims, there hasn't been enough history articulated well enough to say
definitely
this, that.
Definitely.
You understand?
Definitely. And it's from both sides as well. Because even, do you know what? I get more attacks even from black people than non-black people. Because you get the black Afrocentrists and the Hoteps and the Kemet people who are like, well, you know, Islam was brought by the Arab slave trade and Islam was spread by the sword. And, you know, they have all of these things. And I feel like it's funny because obviously I studied at SOAS, which was a institution that was set up by the British to teach British people who were colonizing other countries the civilizations and the cultures of the people that they colonized. It was a training camp for literally like when they ruled India, when they ruled Africa, when they ruled all of these places. And so most of the academia that comes from those times is what they consider Orientalism. They call it Orientalism, which is like depicting the East and depicting everything that's not the West in a particular way that kind of presents them as savage, or it presents them as less educated, or it presents them as... And then it also fuels certain narratives that help in colonization and help in divide and conquer. So when you look at, for example, all of the Orientalist accounts of African history, they have different things that we see that have seeped into the way black people think of history and also the way Muslims think of history. So when we speak about, for example, Islam in West Africa or Islam in Africa in general, there's this concept that the French Orientalists developed called Islam Noir, which means black people's Islam. Meaning, for them, they said, you know, the Arabs and the Asians, they're real Muslims because they speak Arabic, they have access to the Quran directly, etc. And so they're real Muslims. He said, but in West Africa, because they didn't realize the depth of the Islamic intellectual tradition in West Africa, and the fact that the Africans still spoke their native languages and wore their native clothes, and they hadn't become Arabized like the other places that came under Arab rule, they said, no, these people are not real Muslims. They follow Islam Noir, black Islam. So they're nominal Muslims, meaning they call themselves Muslims, but they don't really understand the deen. And that reflects in how even people look at black Muslims today. That, oh yeah, you know, they're not real Muslims. Yeah, they take Shahada, they change their name, but they're not certified like how the Arabs and the Asians are certified. And then the way that they narrate history. So for example, Orientalist accounts of how Islam enters West Africa starts with, number one, this whole concept of the Arab slave trade, which is something that Western academics developed to take the blame off them for the transatlantic slave trade.
To counter their kind of
counter the narrative.
Where they done it also, just us.
Exactly. It was a thing developed of, oh yeah, well, you know, the transatlantic slave trade wasn't so bad because the Arabs were in Africa doing the slave trade for how many hundreds of years before us.
Yeah.
I'll break that down, but I'll come back to that. But this whole narrative of the Arab slave trade, so you'll see, for example, in most of the history books that even they teach in West Africa, they say that Islam enters West Africa when the Moroccans invade the Ghana Empire. And that was in the late 1100s. The Almoravid invasion of the Ghana Empire. We have accounts of Muslims in Spain. There was a book written by a scholar called Al-Umari, and he wrote a book called Kitab al-Masalik wal-Mamalik, the Book of Pathways and Kingdoms. And in that book, he describes the Ghana Empire in West Africa, which is in what we now know today as Mali, and it was an empire of the Soninke people. He says that empire, and this is 200 years before the Almoravid invasion of the Ghana Empire, he says that empire, the king isn't Muslim, but his ministers, the person in charge of the treasury, and a lot of the people that work in his government are Muslims. And the capital city has 12 mosques, and the king has built a mosque in his palace for Muslim guests when they come so that they have a place to pray. So if the biggest empire in West Africa, 200 years before this invasion, has 12 mosques or 13 mosques, and people in the government are Muslim, and they're not Christian, there's no Christianity in West Africa at that time, that shows then that the Orientalist narrative of how Islam entered West Africa is different from how not only the Arabs are telling the story, but the Africans are telling the story. Then if you look at all of the scholars in West Africa, there's a scholar called Mahmoud Kati in the 14th, 15th century. He writes a book called Tarikh al-Sudan, and there's another book called Tarikh al-Fattash. That was the West Africans writing in Arabic the history of their empires and their civilizations. In those books, they talk about how Islam enters West Africa. All of the stories are about kings, royalty, etc., who interact with Muslim traders from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Egypt, from North Africa, and they decide to convert to Islam. And then West African Muslims converting to Islam, studying the Quran, teaching the Quran, and spreading the knowledge. So there's no account of Arabs coming and invading them and forcing Islam on them. There's no accounts of even the Arab slave trade. Even this whole thing of the Arab slave trade, slavery was part and parcel of all West African societies before Islam and after Islam. It was also part and parcel of Arabian society before Islam and after Islam. It was also part and parcel of Eastern European society, Asian society. Most societies had slave-based economies. And so when Arabs are coming in and trading, they're trading slaves as well as trading gold, as well as trading silver. But it's not an Arab slave trade in the sense that these Arabs are coming in just to buy and sell slaves or kidnap people and make them slaves.
And specifically black.
And specifically black people. Because there were more white slaves in Arab countries
than
there were black slaves. And they didn't racialize slavery. Because as the same way that they would buy African slaves from Africans and trade them is the same way they would buy European slaves from Eastern Europe. If you look at the Ottoman Empire, they had, and even in West Africa, they had European slaves.
They did, yeah.
Because
funny enough, I was watching the other day on Netflix the whole Dracula.
Yes.
So and I read about, well, I knew a little bit about it, but when I saw that now, the whole, was it Radu?
Yeah.
And his brother, which is and
they were slaves to the Ottomans.
Exactly.
And they're Eastern Europeans.
Exactly.
So listen to this. There's a kingdom in Nigeria called the Kanem-Borno Empire. And it's in what we now know today as Borno State and Maiduguri, etc., North Nigeria. The king of Kanem-Borno wrote a letter to the Ottoman Sultan, and he said he needed Janissaries. Janissaries were the Eastern European slaves that the Ottomans had, that they collected from all of their Eastern European colonies, that would serve as armies, because he had a war with another tribe. So he said, I need like certified
and they were the best
soldiers.
Ones,
they were the best.
Yeah.
So this Ottoman Sultan sent an army of hundreds of Eastern European slaves to a king in West Africa. So this whole narrative of the Arab slave trade and black people being victims of the Arab slave trade, yeah, there was slavery. We're not going to deny history. But the way that people present it as if it was the same as the transatlantic slave trade or worse, it was a completely different situation. It wasn't racialized slavery in the same way. It wasn't used to remove people's cultures and identities and convert them to Islam. These were people that they already had a trade relationship with before they became Muslim. They didn't force them to convert to Islam. And even if they had enslaved Africans, those Africans that they enslaved became absorbed in Arab society. It's different from the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah, where they were still different until 2019, whenever it was,
in the 1960s or...
Yeah,
But then you see that's a damaging narrative, because a lot of people who want to take Shahada, or a lot of people who do take Shahada, or a lot of people who, the Afrocentrists, will use that as an argument against Islam being spread in the black community. And then they're ignorant then of the history of how Islam had contributed to the civilization and building of West African society. So if you study the greatest empires we've ever had in West Africa, specifically, which is where most people who are in the black diaspora come from, especially the Caribbean and the African American diaspora, etc., West Africa's greatest empires were all Muslim empires. The Songhai Empire, the Mali Empire, and, you know, the university that existed in Timbuktu. All of these things existed because of the interaction between West African culture and Islam. So, but I talk a lot about that in the book, so I'll plug the book, and anyone who wants to know about that shit.
Yeah, just, Jazakallah khair, very interesting. You mentioned about, sometimes, so we have a large Afro-Caribbean community, who are reverts, converts. We also have a large, you could say, white community coming to the deen. Now, sometimes what you mentioned, in terms of the Afro-Caribbean community, more specifically, being targeted with Kemetic philosophy, and then now you've got the Hebrew Israelite philosophy coming. And so my point was, sometimes do you think maybe with certain narratives, it brings people towards more of pride? But pride not in the positive sense, we're happy to be certain things. We're happy to be Muslim. Pride in a sense of, look, okay, Kemetics have this. So we were gods, or we were the first people on earth, and everybody else is less than us, and the white man or the European is less than us. Do you think sometimes bringing those narratives, I'm talking about more, let's say, Beyond Bilal, the book and so on, reinforces that? Reinstates that? And again, I'm coming from a community kind of like perspective of trying to keep deen is for everyone. I want the white brother and the white sister to be comfortable in the masjid, and I want the black brother and black sister to be comfortable in the masjid. And as Muslims, as a community, do you think that maybe is I haven't read I've read Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick's book, Deeper Roots.
Oh yeah,
and I've read Hakim Bakande's book, Into the Darkness. So I read a few in Arabic, but I haven't read your one. But your book specifically, I know you said, look, no, but do you think it can? Is there a possibility?
No, it's not possible. Not with my book.
Okay.
Not with my book. It's not possible. No, my book is just about clarifying the history and bringing historical accuracy to all of these things, and just teaching people information that they don't know. But it doesn't raise black people above other people. It's just about clarifying the narrative, because what the reality of the situation is that our history has been whitewashed, and certain contributions and certain things have been downplayed in the history. So even if you think about, for example, like you mentioned the whole Kemetic philosophy and everything. I remember I was talking to someone once about that, and I was saying, okay, well, the connections that you have with ancient Egyptian religion, for example, say you wanted to practice it, or say you wanted to connect with it, how would you do it? Because you don't speak the language, you don't understand hieroglyphics, you don't know anything about the Book of the Dead or all of these things. And the things that you do know have been translated by white Orientalist scholars. So even the people that preach all of this Kemetic stuff, they're getting all of their information mostly from white European scholars, who are the people who they don't trust, that they don't rely on for information. And then I was saying that even if you look at the history, Mecca was founded by an ancient Egyptian. Hajar was the first inhabitant of Mecca. She came from ancient Egypt. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam spent time in ancient Egypt. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam spent time in ancient Egypt. Even some reports, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam spent time in Egypt when he was born, up until the time when he reached maturity, and then he went back to Jerusalem. So you can see then that there's always this connection with Egypt. And then if you look at the Quran, a lot of the stories take place in Egypt. And a lot of the stories take place then in Africa. And even the stories that don't take place in Africa have African characters in them, like Sayyidatina Bilqis and Suleiman and all of these kind of things. So there's a deeper understanding, and there's a deeper way of seeing things and looking at the information. So it's just about bringing that to light rather than using it as a tool to kind of raise.
There were scholars, I think, was it Suyuti?
Yeah, Imam Suyuti.
Wasn't he black himself?
No, but he married a Somali sister.
Did he?
Yeah, one of his favorite wives was Somali, and she was a scholar as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
My people's that.
What was his book?
His book was
Rafu
Shan al-Habshan. And Ibn Jawzi has Tanwir al-Ghabash fi Fadl al-Sudan wal-Habash.
Okay. So just one more point. So, I'm not saying that this is coming from your perspective. So we had a call in the masjid maybe a few years ago. There's an initiative of Black Eid, supporting, let's say black community members doing Eid. And I said, look, we do Eid, and it's Eid for everybody. The narrative of, let's say, dividing Eid from, let's say, and I can see where it's coming from though, because some people might feel left out, that they're not being catered for Eid or in a masjid, and their culture, or they might even see sometimes racism. So I see where it's coming from, but that just further divides the community. I say, look, firstly, we do Eid, and it's kind of like mixed anyway. But the narrative of, let's say, if you have a black Eid, where does that stop? And then black is not monolithic. It's like Caribbean, Africa, they differ. Caribbean islands, they differ.
Different cultures.
Africa, West Africa, East Africa, they differ. West Africa have their different, tribes and cultures and so on. What do you think of that kind of like narrative and discussion?
I feel like in order to avoid these kind of situations, we need to look at the causes of why people feel that they need to do that in the first place. And I feel like that's what's not being addressed. because you don't see any other communities feeling the need to break off and do their own thing because of them being victims of discrimination to the level that Black people are victims of discrimination. So I feel like the only way, for example, to have avoided a situation like that, and I see that a lot, like even within America, I was touring America, and there've been a lot of times where, you know, so they call ISOCs MSAs, Muslim Student Associations. And a lot of the times now what's happening is there'll be a MSA, and then Black Muslims in those MSAs will be victims of racism or discrimination, or like someone was telling me a story of they went to an MSA meeting and people were using the N-word and there was a whole debate and whatever, and they feel like they're coming under attack and there's all these microaggressions. So then they start their own Black Muslim society and they break off from the MSA. And then I'm usually the one that the MSA will reach out to me and be like, oh yeah, we want to do a collaboration event with the Black Muslim Society to reintegrate everyone. And you're somebody that, because I've studied traditionally, so I appeal to the MSA people, but then I'm Black, so I appeal to the Black students, and then I can bring everyone together. They kind of use me to kind of heal that wound. And I'm just like, well, if those situations hadn't occurred in the community in the first place, that made them feel like they needed to, in order to feel safe, break off and do their own thing, then we wouldn't have that situation in the first place. So I feel like the only way to kind of avoid those situations is through this education, mutual understanding. And I also feel like it goes both ways. Like, as much as I'm a proponent for Black history and Black education, I study all history. I've studied Arab history just as much as I've studied African history. I've studied the history of Islam in the subcontinent.
Beyond Suhaib
yeah, beyond Suhaib Rumi, beyond Gharib Nawaz. Do you know what I mean? I've studied all of the different, because I feel like it's all part of our legacy as Muslims. Yeah, it's a shared history. It's a shared culture. It's a shared narrative that we all have. For me, my thing was just uncovering certain aspects of it that many people wouldn't know. But I feel like it's something that we all share and we're all a part of. So yeah, I understand the reasons for it. Yeah. And I feel like the only way to avoid those things was to avoid fostering the environments that would create the need for those things in the first place. That would be the real cause of healing in the community and the real way to deal with that.
What's the next book then?
So the next book is Beyond Bilal Part 2. So I got 2 books coming out. And I've nearly finished both of them, but I'm going to release them at different times. So the second book is like a second part of Beyond Bilal, because in the first Beyond Bilal, I dealt more with the West. So West Africa, America, North America, South America. So this time I wanted to go East. So I speak about Black history and Black Muslims in the East.
Okay.
So I'll talk about, in the first chapter, what they call Aghrabat al-Arab, the crows of the Arabs. Because if you look at Arab society, the Quran is a miracle, it's a mu'jiza, because every mu'jiza, every miracle of the Prophet is in accordance to the phenomenon of the time. So if you look at Sayyidina Isa, his one was kharqul ada, like miracles and miraculous events, and even because sorcery was the theme of the time.
If we look at people and
if we look at Sayyidina Isa, he used to heal the sick, he used to bring the dead back to life, he used to breathe life into things, because medicine and healing, etc., was the
narrative
at the time. Then with the Prophet ﷺ society, the mastery of the Arabic language was the strongest thing that the Arabs had. They hadn't built civilizations in the same way Persia and Rome had. They didn't have sophisticated monarchies and sophisticated cities, etc. There were Bedouins who had mastered the Arabic language, and they had mastered poetry, to the point that you have the shu'ara, the poets that used to write poems that were hung on the doors of the Kaaba. People like Antara and Emrul Qais and all of these poets. And so Arabic language was the miracle of the Quran, the way that the Quran used the Arabic language. But the shu'ara, the poets who contributed to that, the creating of that environment, a lot of them were the sons of Ethiopian women. And so they called them Aghrabat al-Arab, the crows of the Arabs, because of their skin color. You know, crows are blacks. So there was a book written by a famous Egyptian scholar, and it was called Shu'ara as-Sud wa Khasa'isuhum fi Shi'r al-Arabiyya, the black poets and their contribution to Arabic poetry. And he deals with all of these poets from the pre-Islamic period who contributed. So it's like the station that they have to Arabic is like what Shakespeare would have to English. And a lot of them were of African origin. So I talk about them in the first chapter. Then in the second chapter, I talk about in the Arab world, a lot of the scholars and a lot of the ulama from the Salaf who were black that people don't know about. So for example, I remember I was studying Sahih Bukhari in Egypt with my teacher. And he pointed to a name and he said, "Do you know who this person is?" And I said, "No." He said, "This was the first mufti of Egypt. He was the first person to give fatwa in Egypt, and he was the first alim really of Egypt in the time of the Salaf. And he was a black Nubian that had been enslaved, and he studied, and he's a narrator in Sahih Bukhari, and he's one of the most trusted narrators."
Okay.
Then one of the first muftis of Mecca was also East African, and then all of these ulama, jahiz, and different people who had contributed to Arabian society, even ulum as we know it and ilm as we know it, that were East African in origin or black Arabs that people don't know about. I talk about them in the second chapter. Then in the third chapter, I talk about the relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had with East Africa, and even the words in the Quran that come from East African languages.
Okay.
And the relationship between, because people take it for granted, how did all of these East Africans end up in the Arabian Peninsula in the first place? And so I talk about the story of how they came there, because it wasn't just the traditional narrative of the slave trade that we know.
Yeah.
If we look at Abraha, he was placed there as the governor of Yemen because Yemen, Southern Arabia, was a colony of the Aksum Empire in East Africa. So we always see Africa as being colonized. We never actually see that they were colonizers.
Yeah.
And they had colonized parts of Arabia. And they had ruled parts of Arabia. And that's how a lot of the Ethiopians came to Arabia in the first place, because they were rulers of areas of Arabia. So I talk about that. And then I talk about the subcontinent, because a lot of people don't know. For example, in Bangladesh, there were 4 Ethiopian kings in Bangladesh. And there were people who became kings, people who became rulers, there was a lot of intermixing between East Africans and people in the subcontinent when Islam spread. And a lot of them played prominent roles in the history and the development of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. So I talk about that in the second book, and more. There's a lot. It's coming out soon, inshallah.
Wasn't Bilal radiallahu anh, Bilal's dad a black Arab?
Yeah, Bilal's dad was Arab. Yeah, he wasn't even Ethiopian. He was a black.
There was also what's become the norm.
Yeah.
Arabs are just like light-skinned or white.
Yeah.
There were Arabs that were black and tribes that were kind of like black.
Yeah, there were certain tribes that were darker than other tribes. And it's interesting because even if we look at a lot of the people who we call Arabs today, they're not actually Arab, they're Arabized people. Because if you look at the Arabic language in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it's only really spoken on the Arabian Peninsula. Then 50 years later, from Morocco all the way to the other side, there's all these people that can speak Arabic, and there's all these countries that are included in the Arab world. And if we look at most of the places that we see in the Arab world today, you had people that existed before then that had become Arabized or become absorbed into Arab culture and civilization.
Yeah. So they're not the original Arabs.
Yeah.
You could argue. I think we had a debate about this once, minimum, about what is the original and what is this, and that turned into a whole topic. But I think we can keep talking as per usual. There's many, I think, topics we haven't even touched on really that we can kind of still go on to. Maybe there's a part 2 to come when the second book comes out, inshallah, that we can delve deeper into, and many questions to be asked, because I'm sure many people would want to ask questions.
Yeah.
So Jazakumullah khair. What's the name of the book?
The book is called Beyond Bilal, Black History in Islam, the first book.
Cool.
And then the second book is Beyond Bilal, Black Muslims in the East.
Cool.
And then I got a third book coming out as well that I'll end it with this. So it was interesting. I was talking to one of my friends and we were talking about just the overlaps in world history. So the biggest empire that Europe has ever known was the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire began in Rome in Italy, but the capital was then transferred by Emperor Constantine to a city that he built on the eastern part, because the eastern part of the Roman Empire was the more prosperous part.
Okay.
And so he named this city after himself. He called it Constantinople, which is what we now know today as Istanbul.
That's Turkey.
So when we think about the Roman Empire, it's a European empire, and they're the foundation of European civilization, essentially. Everything we have comes from the Romans. They ruled England, France, Spain, Germany. They also ruled Turkey. They ruled Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. All of that was the Roman Empire. If you think about, like, I grew up Sunday school Bible stories, Jesus, they're under Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, all of these places were ruled by the Roman Empire. Greece, Rome, all of this was the Roman Empire. But the part that had connection with the East was the wealthier part. The Western Roman Empire was the poorer part. What we now know today as the West and England, Germany, etc., was the poor part. And then the East, Turkey, Spain, Turkey, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, that was the richer part.
Okay.
So he split the empire in half to keep the administration better. And then the Western Empire crumbled and failed, and it became different competing states under the Catholic Church. The Eastern Roman Empire kept going strong, even till the time of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why we even have Surah Rome.
Yeah.
And they call it the Byzantine Empire, but that takes away from the fact that it's just the continuation of the Roman Empire. And it was the most powerful empire in the world at the time. In the 1400s, Muhammad al-Fatih, who was the emperor of the Ottoman Empire, takes Constantinople and makes it a part of the Ottoman Empire. So then for the Europeans, that's the biggest sign of the threat of Islam, because the Muslims already rule Spain. They already rule parts of Italy. They already have reached the doors of Austria. And now the biggest empire in the history of Europe has fallen to the Muslims. And not only that, the emperor of the Ottoman Empire is calling himself Kaiser-i-Rum, the Caesar of Rome, because he captured the capital. So the Ottomans saw themselves as the successors of the Roman Empire, which had now become Muslim. So from this threat, the Pope in Italy decides to issue what they call a papal bull, which is like a fatwa, because he's the head of the church. And this papal bull, he says, is the obligation of the Christian kings in Europe, specifically Spain and Portugal, to enslave the Muslims wherever they find them and colonize the Muslim lands. So if we look at that in the 1400s, what happens after the emperor, what happens after the kings receive this fatwa? The first thing, where are the Muslim lands and who are the Muslims? If you look at the Catalan Atlas, which is the map where we have the picture of Mansa Musa, they describe the Muslim lands as North Africa and West Africa, because West Africa for them is Muslim. So then they start to send ships, and the Pope specifies from the Cape of Bojador, which is Western Sahara, Morocco, all the way to the coast.
See where you're going with this.
All the way to the coast of Guinea, which is the West African coast. So the Portuguese then now come into West Africa and North Africa. Not only that, but their way of getting to the east to trade has been blocked because the Ottomans have taken over the Christian Roman Empire and made it a territory of the Muslims and start imposing taxes. So they have this fatwa to enslave Muslims. They have this fatwa to colonize Muslim areas. And then they're looking for a new way to get to Asia, which is only through the West African coast. That's when we start to see them now come to West Africa and capture people and enslave them, and they start the transatlantic slave trade. So the start of the transatlantic slave trade is the result of the Islamophobia of the West. So the reason why African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans even exist is because of the threat of Islam to Europe.
Crazy. I saw the link as soon as you started doing that. I was like, that's crazy.
So I discussed that in the book and more, just about the fact that so much of this history that we feel is not connected is connected.
And the years line up, like how close it is together?
Everything lines up.
Okay.
Because you have the fall of Constantinople. Then you have the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. Then you have the fall of Granada, which is in 1492. And then what happens after the fall of Granada? Columbus goes to America. Because now they've taken over Spain and Portugal, which was ruled by the Muslims. So King and Queen of Spain and Portugal, Catherine of Aragon and her husband, Christopher Columbus approaches them and says, I have a way that we can get to Asia. Because all now they're looking for a way to get to Asia because the Ottomans have blocked them from reaching there. And so they said, I have a way of getting to Asia without going through the Muslim lands, is that we sail west. So he sails west looking for India, but he arrives in the Caribbean. And that's why they call it the West Indies. And then because they've already taken Muslims from West Africa, they start sending them now to the new colonies to work. And that's why you see the first ever slave revolt that happens in the island of Santiago, which was ruled by Christopher Columbus's son. It's Wolof Muslims from Senegal. And then that's when the King Charles of Spain says, we have to now start converting the slaves to Christianity and stop taking slaves from heavily Muslim areas because the Islam is making them revolt. So that's all in the third book.
I'll be the first one to get that.
Inshallah. But you see how it all relates. So it's like, when you look at now the transatlantic slave trade, Islamophobia in Europe, colonization, because it's through this colonization that Spain, Portugal start to colonize America, South America, then the other countries play catch up, then India, subcontinent, Arab world, all becomes colonized. The native struggles, what the Native Americans, etc. go through, all of that is all connected through these events. And Islam is always at the center of all of these events. So it's a retelling of history just from the aspect of how Islam has been a transformational force in world history.
Of course.
Either positively or the reaction to Islam being negative and how that's affected us today. Because we all see ourselves in different positions. Asians have their struggle. Arabs have their struggle. Black people have their struggle. Native Americans and native indigenous communities have their struggle. But we don't realize that all of these struggles are connected.
In some way or form,
In some way or form. So then if we realize the shared history that we have, it can help us in our interaction to kind of overcome the systems that are in place that are oppressing us.
And everyone just become Muslim. I think we just end it there. No, that was in sack, Akhi. Jazakumullah khair. And definitely we'll get you back for the second book, Akhi. That sounds very interesting. Jazakumullah khair for everyone that's been watching, and inshallah we'll catch you all on the next one. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.